In this video, we will conclude the discussion regarding the identity of the Zanj by identifying their homeland, which was recorded by the foremost geographer during the Abbasid Caliphate, Al-Masudi, who extensively wrote with much bias and prejudice about the Zanj. He, along with Al-Jahiz, serve as the primary sources for modern historians regarding the Zanj. We will also look into the meaning of the word Zanj or Zanji, and how dropping the terminating vowel may have contributed in misidentifying them as Bantu, even when they were not. I would like to emphasize that an objective review of African history will always reveal exploits we will not be proud of, but restoring the tapestry to its original form allows us to know ourselves and become the ancestors our descendants will be proud of. That being said, I make this content to dispel the ignorance surrounding African history, because I don't believe that having knowledge is insensitive or divisive. There are many of us who know African history, and I believe it's time we spoke up. Africa is not a dark continent without a history, because there are many Africans who made contributions that shaped the world as we know it today, and it's time we learned about these and actually revealed who they are. We need to highlight how the Portuguese managed to sail the dangerous Sea of the Zanj, which had extremely rough waters, with the help of experienced Zanj sailors, most likely, who understood how to navigate these waters, but are never credited in mainstream history, because mainstream history simply says the Portuguese sailed around and suddenly they were in India, and then the world changed. But they wouldn't have made it to India had they not had these African sailors guiding them. So we need to understand exactly what the agreements were and how these ended up shaping the world we know today. There are also many groups that are often ignored, such as the Damara, who ended up fiercely guarding what is now called the Skeleton Coast along Namibia. Who are they and how did they get there? And then we have other groups like the Khoi, who did not know much about the interior and were focused on running ship refreshment stations. How long had they done this for? Because the Dutch actually usurped them in 1652, and that was a Khoi-run ship refreshment station that the Dutch took over. And according to Robert Moffat, there was a population that spoke a similar language to the Khoi who were being sold in the slave markets in Cairo in the 1800s. So who are the Khoi and how are they present at both ends of Africa, the Cape and Cairo, and how come them and the Damara did speak a similar language? Were they ever related? And why were they so focused on living along the coastal region? Why did the Khoi, who are said to be related to the sun, choose to live by the coast and live such a different life from the sun? In addition, I think we need to understand how different populations resettled themselves in different areas across Africa, and in many cases erasing the original populations or simply appropriating their culture and their identity, which seems to be a theme across many tribes that isn't covered in African history books. We need to talk about that. There are so many positive aspects to African history, such as the music, the customs, the dress, and how these were invented. I would like to understand these stories. I'm curious about them. I don't think it's insensitive or divisive to know our history. In fact, I think silence is insensitive and divisive because it means we are protecting the people that hurt other people, and I'm not going to be part of that. So sometimes these stories will hurt. They will show people in a light that they don't want to be seen in. But it's up to us to take up the challenge and be the ancestors our descendants will be proud of. So in this video, we're going to identify who the Zanj actually were based on their location. Wiki isn't a source for anything. They don't respect primary sources, and I'm still beefing with Wiki. It's a long story. So here we go. Al-Masudi's data is the primary source which tells us exactly where the Zanj lived. He knew them, therefore there is no ambiguity in his explanation. Here's a quote from Al-Masudi regarding the country of the Zanj. He says, "If it was not for the barbarian Gulf, interjacent deserts and marshes, the Abyssinians could not defend their country against the Zanj, for the Zanj were superior in numbers and bravery." I will repeat the quote. "If it was not for the barbarian Gulf, interjacent deserts and marshes, the Abyssinians could not defend their country against the Zanj, for the Zanj were superior in numbers and bravery." The reason it got mixed up was because later writers leave out these very important details of interjacent deserts, marshes, and the Gulf, which are very important to understanding the geography of the region and where the Zanj were located. The omission of these details has led to the misunderstanding that the Zanj were south, adjacent to Abyssinia, which would make that the east coast of Africa. This is incorrect, as Al-Masudi's data points out. Al-Masudi's writings show that there was a desert, marshes, and an entire country called the Barbarian country between these two populations, the Zanj and Abyssinia. And none of these is found south of Abyssinia along the east coast of Africa, but they are found west along the Sahara Desert towards the Morocco, Senegambia, Guinea region. Al-Masudi's detailed description of the country of the Zanj begins with identifying the Barbarian Gulf, which was located in the Barbarian country. This is not to be confused with the Berbers. The Barbarian country spanned North Africa from Libya to Tunisia, Algeria, and then parts of Morocco. I would like to thank YouTuber XSPYDAZX for pointing this out in one of their comments. It really helped me pinpoint the region. Next, Al-Masudi mentions that there were interjacent deserts, meaning there are deserts between Abyssinia and the Zanj country, which touch both countries. Such geography only exists when we move westwards from Abyssinia, and this gets us into the Sahara Desert, which then extends to the west side of Africa. And this is the interjacent desert Al-Masudi refers to, which is touching both Abyssinia and the Zanj country. There are no deserts between Abyssinia and the East African region. This is the equatorial region, and it is lush green with rainforests, which are definitely not deserts. So this can't be the place. Some people thought it was the Somali desert, but the Somali desert is sort of adjacent to a coast itself, and this desert that Al-Masudi describes is not adjacent to a coast. He doesn't say that. Then in describing a river, Al-Masudi says, it proceeds flowing through that part of the country, Sudan, which borders on the country of the Zanj. Here, Sudan refers to proto-Sudan, which was the region that spanned the entire modern-day Sahel region, going to West Africa. This is the only region called Sudan at this time, and this is the only region that is bordered by a desert too, and it is present on older maps. Sudan here shares a western border with the Zanj country. Al-Masudi continues, and a branch goes off from it into the Zanj Sea, or the Sea of the Zanj. Since he describes the river as flowing into the sea or ocean, we can deduce that the Zanj country borders the coast, west of proto-Sudan, placing it in West Africa. It seemed to have spanned the region from the equator up to Morocco. A West African geographer can correct me on this and give us a more accurate location in West Africa. I have added the quotes to the description box below. Now it is important to remember that Al-Masudi was the foremost geographer of his time, and from whom all others derive their accounts. So his is the most accurate account about the Zanj, at least with regards to their location. He does have a lot of bias and prejudice against them, so with regards to their character and their physical appearance, he's not the best person. That would be Al-Jahiz. In addition, he mentions an island of which he says, "This is the sea of the island Kanbalu, which is well cultivated, and the inhabitants are Muslim, but they speak the Zange language. Here we see the first appearance of Zange with the terminating vowel. I'll talk about this later in the video. He continues to say, the Mohammedans have conquered this island and made the inhabitants prisoners, just as they have taken the Isle Crete in the Mediterranean, which happened at the beginning of the Abbasid and end of the Umayyad dynasty. Kanbalu points to islands with a history of Islamic colonization, which are most likely the Bisagos Islands located off the coast of Guinea-Bissau, which is why the Zanj country most likely covered the region from southern Morocco down to what was called Lower Guinea. Another place the Zanj appeared during Al-Masudi's time is Sofala in Southeast Africa, and this is why they were probably misidentified as Bantu. But they appear here because of an invasion. During this time, we see the appearance of the Soto language, and the Sutu is a mix of Proto-Bantu and Nilo-Saharan languages. One of the many reasons we know this was an invasion is because the Proto-Bantu language becomes a substratum of the Nilo-Saharan language, and the grammar changes to adopt the Nilo-Saharan grammar, and such language changes usually happen when there is a change in authority, or the original population declined so much that it was replaced by this new population, so they introduced a new way of speaking, which was the invaders' way of speaking. Sofala was recorded as Sofala, which means worthless in Arabic, and was so named to denote the people who refused to adopt the Islamic ideology in favor of keeping their own, which predated Islam by thousands of years. You really can't tell God about God. That's all I'm going to say about that. There was also an acknowledged phenotype difference between the Zanj and the indigenous populations they had invaded, which is acknowledged by different Arab writers at this time. They looked as different as the San people would look placed next to the Sudanic people. Sofala seems to have been the first location to fall to the Zanj Arab Islamic control, because this is where the Zanj are said to have invaded the indigenous population, who had a different phenotype, and this integration resulted in the Sutu, Vatawung, and then later the Nguni people. I am still researching the timeline of these events, but they are said to have started taking place around 900 CE or AD. Al-Masudi knew the Zanj, and his writings have details that show that the Zanj were not from East Africa, and they were not Bantu, as conventional history or Wikipedia, I'm still beefing with them, identifies them to be. You know what? Wiki won't even change this. If you try to change it, they'll send you to the sandbox. So they always sent me the sandbox, and I didn't appreciate that, so I just quit using them. So instead I just use ChatGPT, and I yell at it when it shows any bias and towards African history. So my ChatGPT knows me very well. It knows not to be biased these days. Anyway, back to the video. When we take Al-Masudi's description of the Zanj, it shows that the Zanj were Nilo-Saharan Sudanic population whose country was west of the proto-Sudan, nowhere near East Africa. This region is located in West Africa. It also has a history with the Islamic world, and was the second location to have a sultanate in Africa from Tunisia. So this is evidence enough that the Zanj were out of West Africa and not East Africa. And now for the probable meaning of the word Zanj. If Zanj is taken to be a Proto-Bantu expression, it most likely needs to be corrected to Zanji with a terminating vowel, because the Proto-Bantu language has terminating vowels. All words have terminating vowels. This is important because there is evidence from writings taken from Arab Islamic writers that they had a practice of dropping terminating vowels from any expressions that they adopted, which is why a lot of the expressions they had written about Africa kind of mixed up, but we'll figure them out. Their writings show that they had a practice of dropping terminating vowels, which would have contributed to the change in the spelling of the word Zanj from Zanji with a terminating I vowel to Zanj without a terminating vowel. And this may have been adopted from the Nilo-Saharans, who contributed this practice from their own languages to the Arabic languages during this period in time. And this just goes to show how much influence the Zanj had over this culture and this state of events during this period of time. And these are worth investigating and understanding. So, if the expression was Zanji, then it could have been a Proto-Bantu expression, because such an expression does exist, and it means something to the effect of, well, that's a lot of people, which is used in the context of surprise, often uncomfortable, expected surprise of plenty. And this is in line with Al-Masudi's description of how the Zanj were so many people. And that's one of the things that was so obvious about them. It's like it was so noticeable that there were so many of them. So Zanji may have been the Proto-Bantu who named the Zanji as, oh my god, that's a lot of people. Objectively getting our history right allows us to know the Zanj and their history and contributions as Al-Jahiz knew them, instead of the story that we have of them, which shows them as slaves and people who contributed nothing to the world, and yet they were actually the population that propped up these caliphates. And it expands our understanding of Africa and its relation to the world. It also helps us understand how the Zanj formed these military units that shaped the modern world post 500 CE and AD, and what their motivations for doing so were, because they do seem to have been mercenaries, but it will be interesting to understand exactly what drove them to be seafaring people who actually sailed really rough seas and mastered the art of sailing, and also, unfortunately, the art of war, to the point where they were a force to be reckoned with, and they changed so much in the Middle East and that part of the world, and eventually came back, or seemed to have come back to Africa and changed so much about the African landscape, because Africa is basically now Zanj country, really. The erasure of the Zanj from Middle Eastern history is very interesting to me. I'd like to know why they were discriminated against, and why there was so much effort to erase these people who were once princes and kings in this region to nothing but the Sange Rebellion. I call it an uprising because they were part of the society, and they seem to have been protesting against the ill treatment they were getting from people they had trusted or colluded with, and suddenly there was no honor among thieves, I guess, because that's what it seems they were doing. They were raiding caravans with their accomplices, and I guess when they ran out of patience with each other, they betrayed each other, and that makes for interesting history if that's what happened. I mean, I would like to know, because these people were actually a force to be reckoned with, and they changed modern history as we know it. If the Zanj hadn't existed, they would have not raided the Proto-Bantu realm and basically erased most of my ancestors. So it's like, who are these people, and where did they come from, and how did they live? I would like to know more. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. If you did, please like and subscribe for more African history. I'd also like to thank all our Ko-fi supporters. Thank you so much for your support. You make these videos possible. If you would like to show your support for this content, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. You can buy us a Ko-fi. The link is in the description box below. Thank you.